Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling a really big one, maybe one of the most common questions you're getting right now in lactation support: cannabis and breastfeeding. We're going to break down the complex research into clear, actionable insights you can use.
So picture this. A parent looks to you and asks, is it okay to use cannabis while I'm breastfeeding? As a lactation professional, you're right there on the front lines. They're coming to you for solid, evidence-based advice, and you know the answer isn't a simple yes or no. So let's really get into it.
Okay, to really tackle this, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the modern cannabis landscape, then follow the pathway from parent to baby. After that, we'll dig into what the research actually shows, talk about the caregiving environment, and then wrap it all up with how to handle that counseling conversation. All right, first up, the modern cannabis landscape. We've got to understand the basics here because, and this is a huge point, the cannabis people are using today is not the same stuff that was being studied decades ago. Okay, so the first thing to get straight is that we're talking about two main players here: THC and CBD. THC, that's tetrahydrocannabinol, is the part that causes the high. It's the psychoactive component. Then you have CBD, or cannabidiol, which is non-psychoactive, no high. People often use it for things like pain or anxiety. These two are really different, and that matters a lot when we talk about exposure for the baby. And this brings us to what I like to call the potency problem. This is so important when you're looking at any of the older research. Back in the 70s, the THC content in cannabis was maybe around 1%. Today, it can be as high as 30%. That's a massive difference. It means the findings from those older studies might not really apply to the risks we're looking at today. So that brings us to our next section, from parent to baby, the pathway. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of the physiology. How do these compounds actually make their way through the milk to the infant? Well, it all comes down to their chemical makeup. Okay, this right here is probably the single most important concept to grasp. THC and CBD are fat-soluble, or lipophilic. They love fat. This is the total opposite of something like alcohol, which is water-soluble and gets flushed out of your system pretty quickly. Because cannabinoids are drawn to fat, they don't just pass through. They get absorbed by and stored in body fat, and that includes breast tissue. And here's the direct result of that. We know that human milk is super fatty, right? That's what makes it so perfect for growing a baby's brain. But that high fat content also makes it a perfect storage depot for THC. It literally acts like a reservoir, allowing THC to build up in the milk. And get this, the concentration can be up to 8 times higher than what's in the parent's own bloodstream. 8 times! This timeline really puts it all into perspective. You see, with alcohol, it's out of the system in a few hours. But with THC, because it's stored in fat, it's released slowly, over days or even weeks after someone has used it. This is why the whole pump and dump idea just doesn't apply here. It's not a quick fix. In fact, THC can be found in a baby's urine for up to 3 weeks after the parent's last use. That tells you just how long-lasting this exposure can be. Okay, now we're at the heart of the matter. Section 3, what the research shows. We know it gets into the milk, we know it sticks around for a while. So the million-dollar question is, what do the actual human studies say about how this impacts babies? Now, before we even peek at the results, we have to put a giant asterisk on all of this. It's so important to understand that the research we have is, well, it's complicated. A lot of it is pretty old, the studies were often really small, and here's the big kicker. They often couldn't separate out prenatal exposure from postnatal exposure. So was the effect from use during pregnancy or during breastfeeding? It's really hard to tell. So if you look at these early observational studies, you can see why there's so much confusion. You had one from 1985 that found no big differences in development at 1 year. Then another in 1990 found lower motor scores, but again, they couldn't rule out the effect of prenatal exposure. And a 1992 study found no significant link to SIDS. The results are kind of all over the place, which is exactly why this has been such a tough question to answer. And this quote from a 2014 review just sums it all up perfectly. It says, based on preliminary and conflicting results, the true effect of marijuana exposure during lactation is not known. Basically, after looking at all the evidence up to that point, the conclusion was, we don't really know for sure. But of course, the story doesn't end there. Science keeps moving forward. And while that older research was pretty inconclusive, newer studies are starting to give us a much clearer, more detailed picture. So let's look at what we're learning now. Okay, let's talk about CBD for a second, A really interesting modeling study from 2023 came out with a pretty significant prediction. It suggested that the amount of CBD a baby gets through breast milk is magnitudes lower, we're talking way, way smaller, than even the lowest therapeutic doses that are approved for kids. This kind of points to the idea that the risk from CBD exposure through milk might be pretty low. But on the flip side, when we look at heavy THC use, the picture changes. Another 2023 study, this one was a big one, looked at cannabis use disorder, or CUD, during pregnancy. And what they found was a 1.5 times increased risk for sudden unexpected infant death, or SUID. That's a 50% jump. This is a huge red flag that heavy prenatal use is a serious risk factor we absolutely have to be aware of. And, this whole conversation goes way beyond just what's in the breast milk. That brings us to our fourth point, the caregiving environment. We have to think about safety and what impairment means when you're caring for a tiny baby. So let's get really practical here. These are some absolutely essential, non-negotiable safety practices. First, there must always be a sober, unimpaired adult available to care for the baby, period. Second, avoid bed sharing. Cannabis can make a parent sleep much more deeply, and that dramatically increases the risk of accidental suffocation. And third, no secondhand smoke. Just like with tobacco, that smoke is full of harmful chemicals that are dangerous for a baby to breathe in. Okay, so we've looked at the science, the physiology, the safety issues, now for the big one. How do we pull all of this together and actually apply it in our practice? Let's talk about the counseling conversation. The big medical organizations have weighed in on this, and their guidance is pretty clear. Take the Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, for example. They advise healthcare providers to recommend that parents either stop using cannabis or at least reduce it, all to help prevent potential negative long-term outcomes for their kids. So here's a really helpful framework you can use for these risk-benefit discussions. Step 1, always start by affirming the benefits of breastfeeding. You're on the same team. Step 2, talk openly about the unknowns and the potential risks. Step 3, assess their specific situation. How often are they using? What's the baby's age and health status? Step 4 is all about harm reduction strategies. And finally, Step 5, support them in making their own informed decision. It's about empowerment, not judgment. Look, if a parent asks you for the absolute bottom line, the clearest, safest advice from major health organizations is simple. Avoid cannabis entirely while breastfeeding. Right now, there's just no known safe amount. But we all know we work in the real world, right? And for a parent who just can't or won't stop completely, that's where harm reduction becomes so incredibly important. The ideal goal is abstinence, sure. But if that's not possible, the realistic goal is to reduce harm. And let's be clear, helping a parent reduce their use is way, way better than having them quit breastfeeding, especially when you think about all the huge benefits of human milk. And that really brings us full circle, back to that central question. In the face of all this scientific uncertainty, how do we best support both the parent and the child? I think the answer is that our job is to be that steady, non-judgmental, evidence-based guide. By talking openly about the risks, hammering home those safety practices, and supporting an informed decision, we can truly empower families to make the best choice possible for them.